Okay, today's video, I'm making confession. I'm afraid I may have accidentally sold my soul to the devil. I certainly hope not, and this is my attempt to repent if I have. But it all stems back. Now, the real question is, of course, are we living in a living hell right now? Well, as it stands, according to the news, if you believe them, things are on the up and up. The economy's getting better. They're trying to get some kind of deal worked out in Europe, which is a key thing if we're going to continue. And my question is, well, is this deal they're working out, is it for real, or is it just more smoke and mirrors to cover up the collapse that's already happened? Because there's a few people who think that the economy's already been collapsed, and there's a lot of behind the scenes shuffling going on to keep it hidden from most people as long as possible. I don't really know. I'm not an economist. I've heard different things. There are some indicators things are getting better. There are a lot of indicators things are getting worse. They like to report the good stuff more than the bad stuff. The stock market has recovered recently, but I'm not convinced that things are getting better. So anyway, I don't know. For one, are things going to get worse? Are we going to get to the point where it's a living hell? And there's the whole, peak oil thing. That a lot of people say, oh, well, we're already in decline in our oil usage, but at the same time, according to the International Energy Agency, projection is that by 2016, that global demand for oil will outstrip supply by a ratio of 3 to 1. That seems pretty significant. Maybe things will develop at that point. I don't really know. Maybe we'll be too broke. Right now, the price of oil is at over $100 a barrel. So, anyway, so the first question is: well, are we moving into a period that will be like a living hell here? Because if we are, it may all be my fault. Because it was November 2000. And shortly before we were headed back to the East, I was headed back to the East Coast with my family to visit everyone out there. We were having a big family reunion. It was one of the only times we ever did it with everybody from the West and the East Coast. I was originally from the East Coast. I lived in Massachusetts for 7 years when I was a kid. And we moved to Southern California and then Northern California. But So the East Coast was where I was originally from, and we used to have get-togethers over there all the time, and not as much. And as soon as we moved to the West Coast, obviously that happened less and less. But we had one big get-together in 2000, and Christmas of 2000. And before we went to this, it was actually some of the same family I was going to visit out there was on the West Coast about a month beforehand in November, and we were at Disneyland. And it was during the time which they still hadn't really, the election was on November 2nd, and they hadn't decided on who won yet. It was still between Gore and Bush. And they were counting the votes. And, in the end, they ended up not counting all the votes. They decided, they ruled that, I guess they weren't going to count the absentee ballots or something like that. But it was during this time they were still counting the votes. They hadn't really declared the winner yet. That I was at Disneyland with my family. And I knew we were having this big get-together coming up in December. And I wanted snow badly. I hadn't had a white Christmas in a long time, and when I grew up in Massachusetts, we had them quite a bit. It doesn't snow very much in California. It snowed once here, or it snowed maybe twice here since I've lived here in the 13, 12 years I've lived here, something like that. So I wanted a white Christmas, and I knew that I was going to be meeting up with family, younger family. We were going to, at this point I was 20 years old, I was thin, and was excited for a good time on the East Coast. Was I thin? Maybe I was getting thin at that point. I wasn't quite thin yet. But excited for a good time on the East Coast, and really, really wanted snow. And wanted to go sledding in my aunt's yard in Greenwich. Because, we thought it would be a lot of fun to do it with the family. So, the chances, of course, for that to happen are slim in Greenwich, Connecticut. A white Christmas in Greenwich, Connecticut is not that common because it's on the ocean, so that tends to moderate the temperature, keep it from snowing that much, number one. And number two, you don't really get white Christmases in that, even, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but, to really have enough snow for sledding is, pretty rare at my aunt's house. By Christmas, that is. Afterwards, maybe, but by Christmas time, not usually. And we were at Disneyland. We were taking a break between the rides, and I wanted that snow so badly. And there was a fountain there at Disneyland. And so I said to myself, well, how about I go over there and make a trade? And I don't know why. Why didn't I just go Wish? I didn't have to bring any. I didn't have to mention a trade in my mind or think about a trade. But in my mind, I thought I had to give something up. I thought, all right, I'm going to go to that fountain and say, and I made this deal, and I hope it wasn't with the devil. I did do it in the belly of the beast, i.e. Disney, who I believe is evil. They create entertainment for children, but they also indoctrinate kids to think that, all desirable men are flawless, and women have flawless features and, are big and strong, or, if you're women, you're petite, thin-waisted, It's just the beginning of the unrealistic body type expectations that Disney starts. So that's one problem I have with Disney. Another problem I have with Disney is that they're totally incapable of functioning outside of a greed-based model that they're very good at functioning within. And there's a lot of children's indoctrination that goes on, with Disney Channel programming. They have a lot of, these shows that just indoctrinating a kid to listen to bad music or music that just represents a corporate culture, And the attitudes of the kids on the shows represent a corporate culture, and the clothes they wear represents the corporate culture, and it's all very, it's dripping it's dripping in greed and corporatism, everything they make. But they're very good at what they do. Unfortunately for people like me, because I was one of the kids who's been indoctrinated. But anyway, I've tried to be less indoctrinated than most, but I don't know how much I am. I can say that I wasn't indoctrinated. But so here I was at Disneyland, and I took. They had a wishing fountain. And I made a wish trade. I made the wish, says, okay, if we get enough snow for sledding, then I'm willing to sacrifice Al Gore as the president. George Bush was. At this point, I was just wanting the decision to be over. I wanted them to name somebody. I was tired of waiting. And I thought, well, as long as it didn't look like Gore was going to win, because they were sort of leaning, they kept waiting for the ballots, and it didn't look like the ballots were going to work out in Gore's favor. So I don't know. In the end, I wonder. I read articles on both sides that said, well, yeah, it would, and no, it wouldn't have worked out for Gore. It worked out for Bush. But for some reason, I decided to offer that trade. I was like, well, Bush can be president if I get my snow. Well, and I made the wish, and I knew at the time, I knew I was kind of messing with some, I don't know, if I were to believe in magic, and I don't necessarily believe in magic, but if I were, some part of my brain probably knew that I was getting into dangerous territory. But a month later, what happened? Well, Bush had been voted by the Supreme Court unfairly, along party lines, of course, as the Supreme Court is no longer a nonpartisan group. But it was ruled that Bush was the president. And we know what happened when we got there. I think it was the day before Christmas or something like that. It snowed a bunch, enough to go sledding with my sister and my friends and my family out there, and it was fantastic. The snow covered the whole hill, and we had some of the best times I've ever had in my life out on that hill. It was truly great. It was one of the better sledding experiences. We were making trains. We had this thing where these like mini seats we had that couldn't function by themselves as sledding, but we could sort of, I would ride on like a blown up inner tube, and somebody would grab onto my legs on one of these little like seat sled things that we had, and we'd have trains of 3, 4, 5 people going down, tobogganing, and I think it was mostly the inner tube, but it was fantastic. It's one of the best sledding experiences ever. And I kind of knew at that point that maybe the deal had been done. Well, let me tell you, I loved the sledding, but if I had any idea things were going to get that bad, and that somehow the idiots in this country were going to figure out a way to re-elect George Bush, the worst president in U.S. history, somehow the idiots in this country managed to not only elect the worst president of all time, but elect him for 2 terms. Mind-bogglingly stupid, ladies and gentlemen. For you people who voted for George Bush once, shame on you. Twice, double shame on you. You are an idiot if you voted for him twice. And you should just kill yourself, because the world will be a better place without you. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, he ended up being the president for 8 years. And in that time, a lot of the potential ground we may have had was stripped away. Any kind of energy efficiency went down the toilet. Any kind of, I'm sure Al Gore probably would have been much more bigger proponent of green technology, would have got that ball rolling when it needed to be done. And now we've got a majorly weak attempt at getting our energy sector together. It's coming along at a snail's pace. Nothing's getting done. And it feels like a missed opportunity. Imagine if we had Gore for those 8 years instead of Bush. Now, I'm not a huge Democratic fan, but I did think that Gore was all right as far as Democrats go, because he was environmentally conscious, I think he was ready to put time and effort into getting our energy policy to a point where we didn't have to, where our energy policy wasn't based on declaring war in the Middle East. And now we're at a point where we're talking about invading Iran, and there's tensions with Pakistan, and it could lead to a nuclear war, I see, at some point in the future. Especially the way they're talking about Iran. Who knows what's going to happen with all this stuff. And if that happens, then it may be all on my shoulders because of that deal. And I didn't think it was a deal at the devil at the time. But if it was, then let me say right now to you, the God Internet. I call it the God Internet because, at least potentially, everyone in the universe could see this video at some time. They're probably not going to, but potentially, who knows? This could be an artifact recovered thousands of years after our civilization's burnt to the ground. You never know. But I just want to say to the God Internet, conceivably all the consciousness that's left at the point that this video is being watched, I repent. I'm sorry. I had no idea how bad things were going to get. No idea. Please, God, forgive me for making such a stupid trade. I had no idea. I didn't know what I was getting into. The devil is a crafty son of a bitch. You think you're just going to get a little something, this is how he does it. He makes it seem harmless, makes it seem like it's nothing, and then, and then you get what you want, but of course it's never worth it in the end. The devil always twists it around. So, and it was a pure moment of pure selfishness, and a lack of reason. And I may end up paying for it with my life, the lives of all of humanity. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe it was all just unrelated. I hope to God it was unrelated, because if this is all down to me, then I deserve to be as miserable as I am today.